Hello and welcome to NIL Edge, the show where the people shaping the future of NIL talk about what's working and where it's headed next. Each episode, we feature conversations with NIL directors, athletic department leaders, and industry partners who are building real solutions for student athletes. If you work in an athletic department, represent a brand in the space, or just want a clearer understanding of how NIL works, you're in the right place. NIL Edge is produced in partnership with NIL Newsstand and Digital Sport by Hot Paper Lantern. I'm your host, Sterling Randall. I come from the world of strategic communications and collegiate athletics, and now I work at the intersection of sports, brand, and NIL. Today, we're joined by Josie Leinart, who's a senior associate attorney for Monk, Wilson, and Mandala, specializing in NIL. Without further ado, let's get into it. Today, we are very excited to be joined by Josie Leinart, who is a senior associate attorney for Monk, Wilson, and Mandala, where she works in corporate transactions and practices and leads the firm's name, image, and likeness practice. Josie counsels clients on contracts, transactions, and other corporate matters, including partnerships, shareholder agreements, entity formation, mergers and acquisitions, and regulatory compliance. Josie, thank you so much for joining us today. And how the heck are you?
I'm good. As we said earlier when we hopped onto this call, living the dream.
Living the dream. There's nothing to complain about.
No, there isn't.
I want to jump right into it and have you tell the audience about your background and how you got to where you are today with what you practice.
Sure. I don't have a traditional background. I came out here to LA. I'm from Miami. I went to UCLA and I picked UCLA because I was able to audition at the same time in TV and film. So I was an actress for over a decade. And then later in my 20s, I decided to go to law school. And I'm so glad I did. Out of law school, I was doing litigation. And I got a call one day from Tasha Schweikert, who I actually met when I was an actress. She was a stunt double on a show that I did when in my 20s. And we kept in touch. And I know she went to law school after that. And she was like, hey, do you want to come start a sports practice with me at Monk, Wilson, Mandala and join the corporate department? And at the time I hadn't worked in corporate at all, but I couldn't have jumped ship faster. So went to Monk, Wilson, started in the corporate department, kind of learned the ropes in the corporate department. Little did I know that foundation that I was learning as a corporate associate, in mergers and acquisitions and, contract review, contract drafting, entity formation, all of that I was doing then as a corporate beginning associate was really laying the foundation for an NIL practice, which at the end of the day, NIL is just, sophisticated corporate transactions. And it gets a little tricky with IP and whatnot and employment, but it is, at its core, sophisticated commercial transactions.
Yeah, it's interesting as the NIL era continues to develop, just the professionalization and the corporatization of collegiate sports, and how, as they continue to develop the kind of the similarities between the corporate world and the collegiate athlete world, and even you could say the corporate athlete world is the professional athlete world, how similar those look. So I want to go back to when NIL legislation was first passed in 2021. Mm-hmm. What were some of the things that you noticed about athletes navigating contracts and NIL opportunities that were placed in front of them?
Well, it was just, it still is in some ways the wild, wild west. We have more framework now, but back then, I think athletes were so excited to finally be profiting off of their NIL that they were signing pretty much anything, and not recognizing that there are really, really big pitfalls. And, the student athletes have gotten a little bit more savvy. Now we have an educational proponent to all of this because of the House settlement. But back then, now we see bigger mistakes being made that kind of should be made from people who don't know better.
Mhm.
But back then it was like very easy things that you should catch beforehand. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Uh-huh.
oh, that's a huge red flag. Like no one would ever sign that if you knew. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now it's a little different. The contracts have gotten a little savvier, a little sneakier.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say that. So what jumps into my mind is I can't remember if it was last season or 2 seasons ago. There was a situation with the UNLV quarterback, right, where
Yeah.
he hadn't gotten any of the money that he had been, promised or
Yep.
contractually obligated to receive. And every lawyer was like, "Well, listen, guys, if you hadn't gotten paid, you would have just stopped. You would have just stopped playing because you're not getting your part of the agreement." So I bring that up because when we talked before, you said this phrase, and it's something that a lot of other NIL directors and people in the NIL space have talked about, right? And it's the athletes don't know what they don't know. And in some of these contract situations, and you just spoke about it, where and what are kind of those situations that you see where, athletes need to make sure that they do get proper legal guidance and legal advice?
Well, going off of the UNLV matter, right off the bat, like, let's make sure you have a written agreement, right? I mean, he transferred without ever signing anything or seeing anything on paper. And then you go to the courts and now you're kind of putting some kind of contract together with text messages and email correspondence and he said, she said. So, off the bat, let's make sure we have a written agreement. But I think the big things, the big red flags that you want to look at, and again, now it's a little different because now there's your traditional third-party NIL agreement, your sponsorships, your brand endorsements, social media posts, things like that, and then you have revenue share. So the things that I look for are different depending what agreement I'm looking at. But if we're looking at a third-party traditional NIL agreement, I'm looking at exclusivity, making sure that it's not too broad, that it's not excluding my client out of things that, are neither here nor there with this product. I'm also looking at termination. That's become a big thing. And a lot of people miss usage. So sometimes it's even more important how they are being able to use your content and your NIL even after the agreement terminates. That's such a nuance kind of is looked over. But if the company is able to use your content and your NIL even after the contract is over, then that is a red flag, and if you should very much be getting compensated for that usage. If you're not, that's something that you should be negotiating for sure.
Is usage one of the most common mistakes that you see that people miss when you are reviewing contracts for student athletes?
Yes. Just this morning, someone reached out to me about it was a traditional third-party agreement. And that was the first question I asked. I was like, what does the usage look like? Because when I got the terms, it did not talk about usage whatsoever. But if a company is using your NIL after the agreement is over, well, even if the exclusivity has terminated, another brand is not going to want to enter into an agreement with you if their competitor is using your NIL and using your content still. You want to be able to control how your NIL is being used and when it's being used.
Yeah. So, so that's great. Usage, exclusivity. What are some other things that, like, if I'm a student athlete or the parent of a student athlete, what are some things in a contract that I should be looking for before I sign an agreement?
Well, like I said, exclusivity, usage. You also want to look at, and again, it's this really depends on what kind of agreement you're looking at. I know a lot of athletes now are looking at agent agreements and signing representation agreements, looking at the percentage that they're taking from these deals is very important. We see really inflated percentages that are just not industry standard. That's something that you want to be very careful with. You want to look at the term as well. With NIL, we like shorter terms because so much is changing, right? Not only the law, but also the student athlete. If they have a fantastic season, their fair market value goes up significantly. And if you've signed this year-long agreement, you are really not getting the bang for your buck that you deserve because your fair market value has increased. So the term is also important. We want to keep it short. Those are, I would say, term, termination, exclusivity, usage.
So when you are starting to work with a student athlete, can you walk us through the steps of kind of what it goes through with maybe your guys' intake of how you begin working with a student athlete or a brand or a university?
Sure. I mean, the first thing that we do, usually we get submissions. I mean, we get clients from so many different ways, but WeAreNIL has its own website and we have a submission form. So we get that, contact them right away. And the first thing we do is just get on the phone or Zoom, video conference, so that we can get to know the client, whether that's a student athlete or a university or a brand, and really understand what their needs are and what they are looking for. And from there, we can kind of put a team together for this client specifically. So is it a university wanting a presentation, an educational presentation? Are they wanting a presentation for international students versus just their student body at large? Is it a student athlete who needs entity formation because they need to form an LLC? So that's going to be different, obviously, than a university. And do they need brand protection? So we'll bring in, we're so lucky that we are a full service law firm, and we can, tap in the trademark department, IP department. Hey, this client needs this specific resource that the corporate department will hand off to trademark, to IP, because that's their specialty. So then, we kind of form a team for that client specifically and move forward from there. But I think the greatest thing about NIL for me is the relationships that we get to form. And I love those conversations with clients and them being able to email us, call us anytime, and have that one-on-one relationship, for me, is the most important thing.
Yeah, from my background, I used to work in collegiate athletics, and I was a women's basketball SID at Southern Miss, and
Awesome.
that was over 10 years ago. But some of those student athletes I still talk to, where we follow each other on Instagram, and I've had kids, they've had kids, and it's a cool, interpersonal relationship that was all started when they were student athletes.
Yeah, it's really cool. And now, truthfully, student athletes, like, they're becoming their own brand if you're doing it right. And it doesn't even matter if you're a starter or a star. If you're doing it right, if you're taking advantage of all of the opportunity that NIL, that social media, that your, D1, D2 spot on the roster is giving you, like, you should be operating at a different level than student athletes did 6 years ago. Like, you should be looking at this as if, you are your own brand, you are your own corporation. So it's very cool to start with student athletes at the very beginning of this journey and develop these entities for them and watch them really succeed and take advantage of these opportunities and go from, just small one-off third-party agreements to, like, really making a name for themselves in this world. It's very cool to go through that journey with them.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned just a little bit ago, was the presentations that you guys do for universities and athletic departments.
Yeah.
What do those sessions typically consist of? Is it a lot of what you just said of, hey, you're more than just a student athlete, you're a brand now, this is how you build it, this is how you back yourself legally? What do you talk about with the student athletes?
Well, more and more we're getting requests for presentations for international students. So those presentations look different because the needs are different. So for international students, we're letting them know, these are the laws. These are your guardrails, which are very different than domestic student athletes. But generally, we give them the lay of the land. Like, this is what NIL looks like today. These are the rules that are guiding what you can and can't do. And then we go into the pitfalls the common mistakes that we see student athletes make with NIL agreements. And that, you and I have already discussed: exclusivity, termination, usage rights. We talk about all of those things. And then we've just added a section in this about social media. So we noticed that, sure, your top 5% stars, student athletes, like, they're getting these NIL deals, whether they're posting on their social media or not. But everybody else has to, you can really make good money, but you have to work for it. Like, it's not going to come knocking on your door. You have to know how to use your social platforms, and you need to know how to build your own personal brand. So I started to recognize, well, it's not very helpful if we're talking about these pitfalls and these agreements if they're not being approached with these agreements. So how can we get them to a position where they know how they should be performing on their social platforms? Because we see it more often than not that these opportunities aren't being taken advantage of, and it's because they just don't know what to post, how to post it. So we included now a section on social media and best practices on social media, and just kind of like how to get started. What are the things that you should be doing? What are the things people enjoy watching? We've added that. And then I think the coolest thing that we do is at the end, we've given you all of this information. So we have something called, it's kind of a rip-off of Deal or No Deal, but it's like nil or no nil. We give them an agreement, and we take those big provisions that, that we've talked about now a couple times, and we put it up on the screen, and we ask them, what's wrong with this? Like, what do you see here? And they're actual provisions from real agreements that we've seen.
Oh, wow.
And so the athletes it's very cool to watch them be like, oh yeah, that's, that exclusivity is way too broad. We need to narrow it. Or the usage right, the tail at the end is just too long. Are we being compensated for that? Or that option goes into, the playoff of our football season. So, we shouldn't agree to that. We should ask for more money if that option is taken. It's really cool to see them, like, the lights kind of go off at this point in the presentation.
I want to go back and drill down on something a little more that you mentioned, because it was something that we had talked about when you spoke earlier that you were really passionate about, which was international student athletes and NIL. Obviously, that's a very complicated situation. And just how, there's even more legal hoops to jump through. But this might sound like the most like softball, just home run question ever. But what are some of the biggest legal limitations that are facing international students when it does come to NIL?
Yeah, in addition to all of the rules and regulations that you have to follow, the traditional NIL rules and regulations, NCAA, university, state, you also now have immigration law, labor law, and none of those laws have developed along with NIL. It just hasn't. And I don't foresee it developing anytime soon. So, it's international students, you're just not allowed to work in the States, period. So all social media posts need to be posted outside of the US. All of the
Okay.
work needs to be done outside of the US. Nothing can be done here.
Okay.
And when we're talking to athletic departments about international students, they're terrified, and rightfully so,
Yeah.
that God forbid they're going to put one of their international student athletes in jeopardy, and
Yeah.
you know they no longer have their visa, or
Yeah.
it's taken away, and they have to actually leave the school. So it's handled very, very delicately.
What's your one piece of advice that you give to athletic departments or international students when it does come to them working with NIL? Is it that, like, hey, like, don't don't give up, or is it just make sure you understand completely what you're doing so there aren't crazy severe consequences that come from?
Well, I think first and foremost, you need to really, really educate your international students,
Okay.
and let them know the very real consequences that can come from violating these labor and
Yeah.
international laws. Because if a student athlete doesn't do things by the book, um, that could be a real problem. Obviously, we know that they are supposed to provide the school with their NIL agreement. That NIL agreement is supposed to go through NIL Go, and be approved through NIL Go. But if you have a rogue student kind of like do things on their own, um, they could land in a lot of trouble. So I think first and foremost, you need to be extremely clear with your international students and provide really good education so they understand these consequences. So they know that you have to go to compliance before you proceed with any NIL agreement. And then the second thing is like, listen, it can be done. We help athletic departments do it all the time. It just has to be done very, very carefully. So don't give up for sure. International student athletes should also be engaging in NIL, but you just have to be really careful.
The biggest elephant in the room when it comes to NIL, in my opinion, I think is athletes being classified as employees. In my opinion, that's where this all started. You've
Yeah.
had so many teams that have tried to become classified as employees, and it's got caught up in legal battles, and it ended up not happening. As we move closer and we move further along in the NIL era, from a legal perspective, how real do you think that possibility is of student athletes eventually being deemed as employees?
Um, I don't just think it's a possibility. I mean, I think we're seeing it. We have already taken steps towards that. The very first step was revenue share. It
Mm-hmm.
was a huge taboo. Universities can't pay their student athletes, and then the House settlement allowed for that to happen. So now we have direct payments from the university, um, to the student athletes. If you look at the revenue share agreements, those are group licensing agreements. Like, there's most of them, if not all of them, but most of them provide for group licensing rights. That's also a step towards making this professional. Um, People talk a lot about, oh, well, control, because the definition of an employee is somebody working for an employer, being compensated by that employer under their direct control.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing that control creeping more and more into these revenue share agreements.
Uh-huh.
And it is a direct result of the transfer portal.
Okay.
Basically, universities are bleeding out. Like, they are giving all of this money to student athletes that are leaving after a season. And their way to control it is through the revenue share agreements. So that's the big question. Is there enough control? And I think that because the revenue share agreements are becoming more sophisticated, yes. So in every revenue share agreement, you'll say, this isn't pay for play, this isn't pay for play. And it'll be in like big red bold letters, but then in footnotes and in like the fine print, you'll see that, well, sometimes their compensation is docked based on performance. That's control. You'll also see things like you're not allowed to sit out a game if you've been approved by medical to play. You're not allowed to sit out. That's control. So we're seeing this level of control creeping into these revenue share agreements more and more. And it's funny because universities say they don't want this because they can't afford it. But it's their only way to stop the bleeding with this transfer portal situation that we're seing. So I think it's a very real possibility, and it's in some ways it's here. It's just not official.
Yeah. So when that does happen, what changes do you think are going to happen to NIL and collegiate athletics overall? Do you think, as you just said, with control, does that mean the transfer portal is going to go completely away? Are athletes are going to, sign like not necessarily a letter of intent, but when are they going to sign contracts that then they have to see the end of their contracts term fulfilled when they start going to a school?
Yeah. So, what's interesting about thinking about whether this becomes formal employment is that on a positive note, because there's not many, but on a positive note, it'll make NIL a lot clearer. You'll now be able to determine what actually is institutional compensation versus a true NIL deal. Because right now, everything is being called NIL when truthfully, you're being compensated to play. And you're like, oh, it's their NIL. No, it's not. You're being compensated to play. And then you have your true NIL deals. So on a positive note, I think it'll make NIL a lot more clear, a lot more distinct. But if athletes become employees, they're going to unionize, and they're going to have collective bargaining rights, just like they do in any professional team. And I think that it's going to be a big problem for institutions. They just cannot afford it. They can't afford to basically run this corporation while also running an education institution. And they're going to be hit really hard with Title IX. They've kind of been able to avoid Title IX with the revenue share. That's going to be unavoidable if this becomes official with employees.
So, I mean, obviously employment status is probably the biggest unanswered question, but what are some other, from a legal standpoint, what are some other unanswered questions still facing NIL and collegiate athletics today?
Unanswered questions. As we said, employment I would say is probably the biggest. And then the transfer portal and how that is going to be regulated, if at all. That's also an unanswered question, which I think would be answered with employment. With any other professional team, there are rules in place that determine how you move, when you can move. And all of those things are being avoided right now in NIL, which is why we have this transfer portal issue. So I think the transfer portals also, there's a lot of unanswered questions there, and what guardrails we're going to put in place. What else? Yeah, I would say employment and transfer portal. Those are like the two big unanswered questions that we need answers to, so that we can have some kind of regulation.
I know we talked about it earlier, but before we wrap up, I want to make sure people know where to find you. If people want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing and how maybe they need your legal services, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, we do have an Instagram page, WeAreNIL. And so it's a great page to follow for education. And you can always message us there. So, we put things out all the time, and news and whatnot. If you go to our WeAreNIL website, there's several different emails there that you can look up myself, you can look up the rest of the team, and you can find our email addresses there. And you can also, submit any inquiries on the WeAreNIL website.
Okay, our last question. This is something that we ask to everybody. So take us back to your UCLA days. Where's your go-to food spot? If I were to come visit, where's the one spot they're like, listen, you can't go to UCLA, you can't visit campus without hitting this spot?
Well, I will say it's been a long time, and Westwood has completely changed. I'm like, this was not here when I was there. But back then, I mean, it was Diddy Reese. Like, I took everybody to Diddy Reese. And I think the cookie sandwiches were $1.25. I can only imagine what they are now. And they were huge. Huge. They were so good for $1.25.
I love it. I'm
really aging myself with that one.
Josie, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And best of luck with all your endeavors.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Josie for joining us and sharing her perspective on the legal side of NIL. If you want to continue the conversation with me, Sterling Randall, do so on LinkedIn. You can also find more episodes of NIL Edge on NIL Newsstand, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Vimeo. Please subscribe, leave us a review and a rating. To learn more about the work we're doing at Digital Sport by Hot Paper Lantern, follow us on LinkedIn or visit hpldigitalsport.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.